Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Matiwos natural processed Ethiopia from Botz Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Botz, based out of Whiting, Indiana. And this coffee is our August 2024 Coffee of the Month, as is voted on by you guys as the coffee you most want to see us review. Botz is a coffee roaster that has appeared on this channel on several occasions, including last month when we reviewed the Nare, a different natural processed Ethiopian coffee. And that's where this one comes into play, as we have made it a point to review more natural processed Ethiopian coffees this year. So I was quite happy to see this one win the Coffee of the Month poll, as I did have a pretty positive experience with that Nare, so I was hoping to replicate that experience with this coffee as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 35. And recipe we went with for this coffee was actually a higher than normal extraction on this one at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 98 degrees Celsius, about 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. Once again, Botz isn't necessarily the lightest roasting American coffee roaster out there, and I usually like to say that they have a slight bit more development than I feel like a lot of people might necessarily expect, given just how popular and how much hype there is around this coffee roaster. And even then, I still say it's not necessarily to the extent where you still see a lot of, we'll say, more traditional American coffee roasters having that developed side of things. That's to say, it kind of falls on the lighter side of that light medium in terms of the roast profile. And even with this one being a natural, you can definitely see that it's not necessarily the lightest, but even then it does have a little bit more development to it. So once again, we're kind of settling on the slightly lighter side of the light medium in terms of the roast profile. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression. And we did run it through the V60, and the cup immediately offered plenty of the classic natural Ethiopian strawberry feel to it at the forefront and an above average level of clarity and definition. So that was very nice. And what's very interesting about this coffee, right as soon as you open the bag, there's definitely a very wonderful aroma, a very prominent strawberry-like aroma that does come from the bag itself. And that definitely lent itself towards a lot of potential, as I felt like there's probably going to be a very intense and enjoyable experience to this coffee, especially if you can keep the clarity high. So having a slightly higher than expected level of clarity right from the onset was definitely positive. In addition to that, there was a tropical aspect that it is slightly bitter, and the entire cup for the most part does remain pretty fruit dominant, an abundance of berries and tropical citrus. So for the most part, a pretty nice start, very much in line with a lot of the expectations, if a little better than the expectations. Day 18 through the Chemex, and this was a little bit more of a mixed impression this time around, as there was a slight bit less cleanliness and a little bit more fermentiness to the red fruit aspects. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward and still relatively clean for a natural, so solid. And I feel like that's something I've said a lot more this year than in years past, where these naturals have been coming out a little bit more clean than expected. Day 21 through the April brewer, and the cup does have a little bit more intensity to it as of this point, as it does feel like a slightly strawberry syrup nectar cocktail with a little bit more fermentiness to it as well. While it is still relatively cleaner for a modern day natural processed coffee, it was offering a little less clarity with a little bit more of the listed lychee present. And I've said in the past, oftentimes when I experience that in coffee, it does come out a little bit more in a fermenty sense. And that was the case with this one right here, as it wasn't necessarily truly clean to the extent that I was hoping for. Day 24 through the V60 with some slightly higher extraction adjustments. And it is kind of interesting that that's the direction that we decided to go with this coffee, mostly because I've been hearing a lot of feedback from people saying anytime they were going a little lower on this one, they weren't necessarily getting the best results. And truth be told, the intensity wasn't necessarily to the extent that I was hoping for with this coffee up to this point. Once again, the aroma of the whole beans themselves wasn't necessarily translating to the experience of the coffee. So I felt like it was possibly a brewing error on my end that I wasn't getting this coffee right, or there was just something more to it. And that's why we opted to go with this option, as it definitely lost a little bit of its structure, as it was much more intense and heavy, skewing much more in that heavier red fruit sense with a little bit more of the fermentiness. And that's exactly what I was afraid of if we had decided to go with the V60 on this coffee, especially with those higher extraction adjustments, was that it would definitely skew in that specific direction. There is still plenty of the nice red berry sweetness, but the entire cup is a little bit more intense and heavy than I would necessarily like. Day 27, we opted for the Chemex with the same adjustments, and I was really surprised how well the coffee was holding up with this adjustment, as it did have the same level of clarity as before some of the earlier days. But at this time, there was much more of that syrupy strawberry feel to the cup, with a higher level of the red fruit and secondary tropical citrus to the cup. So this was notably better. But we move on to day 30 as we opted for the V60 one more time with the higher extraction adjustments, and the cup continued to not hold up very well with this adjustment as it still has plenty of the fermentiness in the finish, heavier red tones yet again to contrast the more syrupy nature of those red berries. There was a slight peachiness that was felt, and it is kind of interesting when reading the description of this coffee. They do talk about coconut, and I've said in the past oftentimes I find a lot of those notes to be pretty similar with me. Oftentimes I taste peach and coconut in a lot of coffees like this. So that was felt here. Otherwise, the coffee has been pretty direct nonetheless. Day 32 through the Chemex with the higher extraction adjustments, and it does continue to hold up well in this brew method, and that's why we opted to go with this specific recipe, is for whatever reason it continued to hold up relatively well. We were still seeing the same level of cleanliness while at the same time just getting a little bit more intensity to the coffee. There is enough fermentiness to justify that listed Paloma note. I had to look up what that was. I think it's some sort of cocktail. A slight booziness in a tropical sense, but for the most part, it's still nice. The clarity is holding up enough to justify pushing this one a little bit more with a little bit more intensity. Day 34 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it honestly felt like by the end there was probably a lot more to be found within this coffee, as it does continue to turn out similar to some of our previous experiences. Additional slight peachy coconut-like aspect, a little bit more of that citric lime component, and a little bit more of some floral aspects present within this one as well. But yeah, kind of surprising that we ended this one as early as we did, but we kind of had to rush this review to get it out before the end of the month for our Coffee of the Month review. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick, and that is the berry fruit level 5. So even if this one didn't necessarily have the most amount of definition to it for the majority of the time, I do have to say that the berry fruit in this one was very intense enough to justify that level 5 mark, because even if you're not necessarily looking at it specifically in terms of the strawberry, there's plenty of the other components to it, that lychee, that coconut, and even a little bit more of a melon-like aspect to it. All of those would fall in line with the berry note that's on here. So given that there's an abundance of berry fruit within this coffee, I felt like the best place to put it was at that level 5, even when we don't necessarily discuss the fact that this was an extremely strawberry forward coffee. So level 5 was certainly the best place to put that. Handful of level 4s. We'll start with the finish, level 4, and I am obviously very happy that this one didn't skew in the direction of being too overbearing and heavy, as that level 4 is already a pretty nice start for this coffee. It's kind of surprising to me that this one doesn't last as long as I might have expected, but once again, that could just be because Ethiopian coffees seem to be having a better year in general, where I'm so used to scoring a lot of these Ethiopian coffees in that level 5, these naturals having just too much of an intensity and a lasting sense to them. So this one being at a level 4 is already off to a pretty nice start. Sweetness, level 4, same thing with that. So this one's pretty sweet. It's fully expected to be very sweet. We are working with natural processed Ethiopian coffee here. But even then, it didn't reach the point where it was overbearing, as I totally could have seen this coffee skewing in that direction, especially with that very strong syrupiness to the strawberry. But even then, relative to naturals, it belongs much more in a level 4 than maybe the level 5, which is to kind of say that this coffee is not quite as intense as I might have expected for a number of reasons going into it. Probably the biggest reason being the description of this coffee being very red fruit forward, which already in itself is a little bit of a scary sign going into the coffee. Acidity, level 4, and there certainly was a fair bit of brightness to this coffee, a lot more brightness than I might have expected, and it did come a little bit more in that slightly citric sense too. So I was kind of surprised by that, given that it's not something that I could have fully anticipated within this coffee, especially based on the descriptions. But even then, it did not reach that point where the acidity was just skewing away from the overall experience of this coffee, because I've also experienced that with much more processed coffees. So I'm happy with that scoring there at that level 4. Citrus fruit, level 4. I mentioned that briefly. There's a little bit of that kind of citric brightness to this one, and that's why that one does score there at that level 4 mark. We have a couple of level 3s. We will start with the florality level 3. There is certainly a heavier floral aspect to this one, though I feel like the main reason it's toned down there at that level 3 mark is because it was overpowered by the much more fruit-forward profiles that were present within this coffee. So even then, just a lot more of those heavier, darker floral components also present within it. Slightly more subtle. It's also why the spice did score a little bit higher at that level 2. let's see here, stone fruit, level 3. And I briefly mentioned that there's a little bit of a peachiness, experiencing it once again on this day as it's felt underneath all of those much more red fruit forward profiles in this coffee. And I did see that coconut note listed on there, which kind of justified to me that peachiness that I had experienced from this coffee. So happy with that there at that level 3 mark. Caramel level 3, there's certainly a candied sweetness to this one. I mean, you can make an argument for this one maybe having a little bit more of a candied red fruit profile to it, especially in terms of that strawberry. The strawberry does come in a number of different ways. I would say for me, it's mostly syrupy. I can't quite recall what the strawberry note that they do have listed on here is for this one as I'm thinking about it, but definitely a lot of intense red fruits in this one. And then 2 things we're discussing. We'll skip to level 2 real quick. Body level 2. I think that's probably a component of brewing this one with the Chemex. I really should go back and try to figure out where it was with the V60, but this one definitely had a lighter body relative to some of the expectations. That's probably a byproduct of the brew method we went with. Last thing worth discussing is the cleanliness out of level 3. Don't really know where to go with that one, honestly, because I obviously wanted this one to score at a level 4, and I feel like anybody that does justify this one being at the level 4 is probably, I don't want to say necessarily fooling themselves, but maybe they were able to get in a much more clean sense than I was, because there is enough fermentiness, there is enough of a booziness. I mean, this coffee does have 2 notes on here that are big red flags in terms of something that does have a boozy nature to it, and then the lychee, both of which tend to come out a little bit more fermenty to me. Even strawberry. So everything on the description of the coffee itself does lend itself towards offering a much more fermenty feel to it, and it being a natural processed Ethiopian coffee. I fully expected it to reach that level 3 at best. I was really hoping for a level 4. I was really hoping to be surprised, but even then, there's enough of those fermenty aspects to kind of hold it back. And I am curious to find out whether or not I could have maybe gotten that level 4 if there was some sort of adjustment I could have made that would have pushed it all the way up there. But that's probably the most important thing I need to discuss in this tasting wheel, and probably it's probably the best representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I do have a lot of things I want to say about this one, but I'm going to start with this. This review actually was a little rushed, as this coffee did come a little later than I would have liked. And as a result, I did need to kind of squeeze the reviews a little quicker than I would have liked. I usually like to take my time with reviews a little bit more, but once again, since this was our coffee of the month, I did want to get the review released before the end of the month of September. So this one was kind of cutting it close, as our next video after this is going to be our monthly recap. So this is a coffee that I really wanted to work with a lot longer, and it's unfortunate that I didn't get that opportunity to, because I know there's great potential within this coffee. I've heard some feedback on it already where people were getting some mixed experiences and they were having a little bit of difficulty getting this one to its very best. And I feel like I also struggled with it mostly because I was kind of rushing through this coffee. I didn't give it the same sort of thought that I usually would with the majority of coffees that we do review. So that's to say, I don't necessarily think I ever figured out this coffee. I don't think I've gotten the best of this coffee. I feel like either the best of it is yet to come, or there is some sort of adjustment that could be made to get the best out of this coffee. Because once again, you open up this bag and the aroma of the coffee itself is just absolutely tremendous. There is such a wonderful, cleaner strawberry-like aroma to it that I feel like it can be unlocked. It's just a matter of getting this one at its very best. And I'm not entirely sure which direction I probably would have gone with it. But since I do have a fair bit of this coffee left, I will probably continue to tinker with it and work with it outside of this review to kind of see if I might be able to get to this to a point where I enjoyed it just as much as some of the other Botz coffees or natural processed Ethiopian coffees that we've reviewed this year, because I definitely feel like it is capable of being one of the more enjoyable coffees this year. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one's extremely red fruit forward, and I feel like that makes it a very easy suggestion, because anybody that does like their red fruit forward coffees, this one has that in tremendous abundance, most notably in that strawberry sense. I will say, once again, not necessarily the cleanest, but even then cleaner than the average natural processed coffee, while still offering plenty of the natural-like intensity, a pretty lasting finish, even if not necessarily the most long-lasting, and plenty of sweetness as well. Some complementary floral components to it, and plenty of brightness. A lot of positives in this one. Best direction I can point somebody towards for this coffee, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Matiwos natural processed Ethiopia from Botz Coffee. Thank you for watching.